You know, there's actually a time where I thought that John Kelly was acting like the adult in the room. Well, yeah, that time is pretty much over. And it started as soon as he started weighing in on some of these different things. First, Frederica Wilson, and now you're going to see him weigh into the debate over Confederate monuments. In fact, recently he went on Fox News for a rather rare interview. And in this interview with Laura Ingraham, he discussed Confederate General Robert E. Lee and, of course, the recent push to remove monuments and symbols that basically memorialized the Confederate States of America. Now, in this interview, there's a couple of different parts. I want to show you the first part where he talks about history.
Well, history is history. And there's certain things in history that were not so good and other things that were very, very good. I think we make a mistake, though, and as a society and certainly as individuals, when we take what is today accepted as right and wrong and go back 100, 200, 300 years or more and say what Christopher Columbus did was wrong. 500 years later, it's inconceivable to me that you would take what we think now and apply it back then. I think it's just very, very dangerous, and it shows you how much of a lack of appreciation of history and what history is. Oh, really? A lack of appreciation for history? Says somebody who apparently doesn't understand the history. Let's take his saying about Christopher Columbus, right? No, we can't say that. We can't go back and said what Christopher Columbus did was wrong. Yeah, we actually can. What Christopher Columbus did was horrific beyond measure, even to those days' standards. And look, the example that I give is Bartolome de las Casas. Now, Bartolome was a young priest who participated in the conquest of Cuba and wrote a history on the Indies. He actually wrote about all this stuff. He actually quit to become a priest. So he wasn't originally a priest, but he's like, oh man, I did such horrific things when I was there with Columbus. I had to get away from it and actually devote my life to God for penance. Now, he described the treatment of the natives. He says, endless testimonies prove the mild and pacific temperament of the natives, meaning that they were nice, they were kind, they were pacifistic, they didn't engage in violence, they were not quote-unquote savages, right? And said that our work was to exasperate, ravage, kill, mangle, and destroy. Now, from that, who is actually the savages? The white Europeans. Now, he said that they thought nothing of knifing Indians by the 10s and 20s and of cutting slices off them to test the sharpness of their blades. Two of these so-called Christians met two Indian boys one day, each carrying a parrot. They took the parrots and, for fun, beheaded the boys. That's not to mention the stories of just endless rape and atrocities beyond description. It was all because they had power and they were going for gold, for money. That was their greed and their carelessness of human beings, right? So, John Kelly, according to your description, it would be wrong of me to say that, no, I'm using today's standards to go and judge how wrong and horrific that is. You can't actually go back and do that. Really? Are you sure you want to go there? Or is that the hill you want to die on? Seriously, John? Now, he talks also about the Confederacy, right? I would tell you that Robert E. Lee was an honorable man. He was a man that gave up his country to fight for his state, which in 150 years ago was more important than country. It was always loyalty to state first back in those days. Now it's different today. But the lack of an ability to compromise led to the Civil War. And men and women of good faith on both sides made their stand where their conscience had them make their stand. Oh, so, no, it was both sides, and both sides have some very fine people who were standing up for their principles. Why don't you guys tell me what principle
the Confederacy was standing on? Oh, right. The side that says keeping humans as property is fantastic. Kelly said it was dangerous to take down these monuments, these historical markers. And as I showed you before, it shows a lack of appreciation and what history is. All right. Now, for one, you know what he learns history from? A statue. Okay, there's these little things called books. You may have actually heard of them. And where you can find these books, they're in places called libraries. And now these libraries, where you can get these books where that contain knowledge, well, sometimes they have them, well, actually, they actually exist in schools, as long as the school can afford them, apparently. Now, these schools teach history, and they can teach that history without celebrating racists. Just saying. Now, the truth is about these statues is that they were created and spread by a group called the Daughters of the Confederacy. Almost every statue that you see in the South was in some way built or financed by the Daughters of the Confederacy. This was one group that was created in 1894 to pretty much, you know, put up these statues commemorating the Confederacy. So this wasn't right after the war. In fact, after the war, a lot of the Confederate leaders were like, yeah, we need to forget about this. Don't put up a statue. Robert E. Lee himself was like, I don't want a statue. I really don't want to inflame the tensions anymore. We lost. I accept that. Suck it up, and let's move on and rebuild the Union. That's Robert E. Lee, right? No, but this group's like, yeah, fuck that. We're going to go and put up a whole bunch of statues of you guys just to make sure that blacks know their place. Now, interestingly enough, right, that same group, when Charlottesville happened, so this is where the white supremacists actually murdered somebody who was standing up against white supremacy, Heather Heyer. After that, the Daughters of the Confederacy actually spoke up and said, quote, "We are saddened that some people find anything connected with the Confederacy to be offensive." I love the victimization, right? Oh, so we represent the Confederacy, but we're saddened that some people are offended by the fact that we represent the Confederacy. And they continue by saying, our Confederate ancestors were and are Americans. Actually, no, you know, if they had gotten their way, they would not be Americans at all, because they literally tried to leave the country to preserve nothing more than an inhumane institution. So these people actually hated America so much that they're like, we're going to leave this country, and we're going to do it because of slavery. It's plain and simple. It's in there. Okay. Now, they also said, we as an organization do not sit in judgment of them, nor do we impose the standards of the 21st century on these Americans of the 19th century. So right there, that's the talking point from a lot of these people. That's John Kelly's talking point. And he's like, well, how dare we go and judge them with 21st century values and they're in the 19th century? I mean, come on. That's just what people did back then. They enslaved other human beings. Yeah, that's true. But there's a lot of people and a lot of countries throughout history that realize, hey, you know what? Enslaving people, kind of wrong. All throughout history, there are a lot of different countries and a lot of different political governments that had at some point banned the practice. Now, sometimes, of course, when new governments would come into play or new kings would go into power, well, they would sometimes roll it back and go, oh, no, slavery's cool again. That's fine. So look, even back then, there were abolitionists, there were people in governments that knew that this was wrong. And look, back before the Civil War, the entirety of the North had already banned it. I think somewhere around I don't want to say dates because I might be off by a few years, but like at least by 1810, a lot of these states in the North, I think New Jersey was the last one to ban slavery. The northern states were like, okay, we all banned slavery, but the southern states, we've got a little bit of a problem here. And in fact, that problem was part of the basis of the South's hostility to the North, and vice versa. In fact, while declaring their right to secede from the Union, delegates from Confederate states cited the future of slavery as fundamental to their cause. Delegates in South Carolina referred to an increasing hostility on the part of the non-slaveholding states to the institution of slavery. Well, that makes sense. They already banned it, and they're like, come on, dude. Like, you literally are holding human beings hostage and making them work for you for free. That's horrible. Not to mention the whippings, the beatings, the rapes, all that stuff that happened. But no, these southern states are like, yeah, we do that. And that's fine because, hey, it saves us a lot of money. It's free labor. Of course it's going to save you money. And they wanted to keep that institution because of that greed. Now, Mississippi proclaimed in its own secession declaration that slavery was, quote, the greatest material interest of the world. You can't get much more clear than that. There was a gigantic financial motive into making sure that they kept slavery. This was about slavery. The war was about keeping slavery. It's not about states' rights. I mean, sure, you could say it's about the state right, but what right are they defending? They were defending slavery. Now, I want to go to Abraham Lincoln, since we're having a history discussion, right? Now, Abraham Lincoln was famous for being an abolitionist, right? But his personal feelings aside, he felt that, hey, man, I'm going to do whatever I can to try to keep the Union together, okay? And he actually, in a way, governed like a centrist, right? And it kind of reminds me of the centrist Democrats today, because he initially pursued an approach of, hey, you know what? Look, we'll let you keep some slaves if you don't break away. This was the kind of approach that he's like, look, we'll preserve the institution of slavery, just don't break away, right? Don't break away, and maybe later on we'll phase out the institution of slavery in the South as well, but just don't leave. Just don't leave. You can work with us. Again, that reminds me of the modern Democratic Party, the centrists, because they'll go and deal with Republicans that are super crazy. And they'll be like, no, don't worry, we can make a deal. And the modern Republican Party is like, no, nothing that you do short of giving us everything that we want will make us happy. But unity. Unity, and everybody really wants to go to that middle. Centrist Democrats, man. But anyway, on Lincoln, he was a Republican, to be fair, just way back before the party switch. He said, quote, if there be those who would not save the Union unless they could at the same time save slavery, I do not agree with them. If there be those who would not save the Union unless they could at the same time destroy slavery, I do not agree with them. My paramount object in this struggle is to save the Union, and is either to save or destroy slavery. It is not either to save or destroy slavery. If I could save the Union without freeing any slave, I would do it. And if I could save it by freeing all the slaves, I would do it. And if I could save it by freeing some and leaving others alone, I would also do that. So that's Abraham Lincoln. But see, here's something that I learned from Charlottesville, is that you cannot take a centrist approach when you're dealing with neo-Nazis and Confederates. People that actually think that, hey, you know what, it's fine to own other human beings. Wonderful. Now, see, one side says, like, I hate black people for no reason. That's not a valid side. The other side is saying, you shouldn't hate black people for any reason, for no reason. Just the fact that they're black. That's not a valid concern. That's not a valid side. And look, for the people saying, oh, you should be able to compromise with that because there are fine people on both sides. No, there's not. You cannot compromise that. That is an uncompromisable position. Just as Lincoln found out that you can't compromise with people that think that owning human beings is their right. They, again, talk about states' rights, but it's not about states' rights. It's about the right to own people. But I'm sure there were, like I said, very fine people on both sides. Look, I don't know if it's intentional, right? Or if John Kelly is just that ignorant about history which is ironic, of course, because their main claim to not remove the monuments is, well, we got to preserve our history. Well, for somebody who wants to preserve history, you sure as hell don't know much about it. Pulling both sides on this issue shows just how utterly Trump-like Kelly actually is. At first I thought he was the adult in the room. Now I realize he's just a smarter version of Donald Trump. Hey everybody, thanks for watching this video. If you want to see more like this, please hit the subscribe button below. And if you want to support truly independent progressive media, please consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/TYTNation.